places, all your darts, you knew they had a weapon that could cut you, slice you, rip you, cripple you, and destroy you, then, and you were as smart as the devil is, wouldn't you say to yourself, I've got to get that weapon out of their hands. What I've got to do is give them something in its place and let them think they've got a weapon. Didn't Paul tell us we're not ignorant of Satan's devices? If you know this book, you won't be ignorant of Satan's devices. Satan has a certain way he does things, and he just doesn't vary because he's so successful with it. All right, now I want to take you back to the Old Testament, the book of 1 Samuel. I want to show you how the devil worked then, and he still works this way today. Jesus said, buy a sword. Now, the devil doesn't want you to have a sword. 1 Samuel chapter 13. Let me kind of tell you the story, and then it'll snap in quicker while we read just a portion of it. You remember that the Philistines were the avowed enemies of God's people. If you're enemies of God's people, you're of the devil. That's all there is to it. There's only two sides to be on. And so you remember they had battled, the Philistines had battled the Israelites time and time and time again, kept getting whipped. They said, they got together one day and say, hey guys, we can't keep fighting these people. They're too good a swordsmen. We've got to find a way to whip them. So why don't we do this? Let's go to King Saul and raise up the white flag and say, King Saul, we don't want to fight you anymore. We want to be your friends. Let's be brethren. And we can get along then. And so they said, now, fellas, what we have to do is lay down their swords, and then we will give them garden tools in the place of the swords. So we'll talk King Saul into closing down all the blacksmith shops in Israel. Won't be any metal workers, so they can't make any swords. When we get them to lay the swords down, say that we'll provide their garden tools for them. We can even sharpen them for them. And then, when we've got them down to garden tools, we'll attack. They won't have a sword, won't have a blacksmith, can't make one. We'll attack them. So, they went to King Saul, offered their program of being friendly, and you just close down all your blacksmith shops, and we'll provide your garden tools for you. And Saul swallowed it. He was so naive. He believed him. 1 Samuel 13, verse 19. Now there was no smith. That doesn't mean people named Smith. It's talking about metal workers, blacksmiths, okay? Now this is after Saul has closed them all down because he believed the Philistines. Now there was no smith found throughout all the land of Israel. For the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make them swords or spears. Remember, I've told you the story and how they talked him out of that. But all the Israelites went down to the Philistines. See? We be brethren. We'll go down to those Philistines' pals to sharpen every man his share. And they'd gotten them from the Philistines in the first place. To sharpen every man his share, and his coulter, and his axe, and his mattock. Yet they, the Philistines, had a file for the mattocks, and for the coulters, and for the forks, and for the axes, and to sharpen the goads. So they took their garden tools that they had gotten. They were already made by the Philistines in their blacksmith shops. So whenever they needed them sharpened, they took them down there. So now they have no swords, no weapons, just garden tools. Now back up verse 17. And the spoilers came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. Now they're going to attack from 3 directions. One company turned to the way that leadeth to Ophrah, under the land of Shul. And another company turned the way to Beth Horon. And another company turned to the way of the border that looketh to the valley of Zeboim toward the wilderness. Now there was no smith found throughout all the land of Israel. For the Philistines had said, lest the Hebrews make them swords or spears. But all the Israelites went down to the Philistines to sharpen every man his share, and his coulter, and his axe, and his mattock. Yet they had a file for the mattocks, and for the coulters, and for the forks, and for the axes, and to sharpen the goads. So it came to pass in the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people that were with Saul and Jonathan. They were helpless, defenseless, couldn't defend themselves. All because Saul was so naive to think that their lifelong enemies had suddenly become their friends, talked them into closing out the blacksmith shop. We'll give you your garden tools. In the day of battle, no sword. Now, what did Jesus tell us to buy? He didn't tell you to buy a coulter. He didn't tell you to buy a mattock or a garden hoe. He didn't tell you to buy a dull blunted axe. He said, buy a sword. I don't have to tell you that we're in a battle today. That's why we're told to put on the whole armor and take the sword. I mean, if you're in a battle. If you don't think we're in a battle, you're either lost, you're AWOL, one or the other. Now, what is our weapon? The sword of the Spirit, which is the what? Word of God. Please note the singular. The sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Now, 1 Corinthians 14:33 says, God is not the author of confusion. If all these so-called Bibles they've got on the market are all God's words, God is very confused himself. Not only that, but he would be the author of confusion. They all have different words. That's what makes them different Bibles. Different words teach different doctrines. And if you know anything about them, you know that they play down the deity of Christ, the blood, the virgin birth, salvation by grace, the whole thing. God's not the author of those books. He only authored one book. If he authored even two, he's the author of confusion. Since he's not, it's not the swords, it's the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. You cannot have two genuine Bibles in any given language. Impossible. God only authored one book. I'll say again, if he authored more than one, he is the author of confusion. Now the devil knows which one is the Word of God. The devil knows which one is the sword. If he didn't know that a sword was available, why would he come up with the coulters and the mattocks and the garden hoes and the forks and the dull blunted axes? He wants to get you to lay your sword down. Therefore, Satan and his crowd have gathered together as spoilers to do all they can to get us to lay down our swords. But they're so nice. We be brethren. We'll provide you with some coulters and some forks and some hoes and some dull blunted axes. We'll even sharpen them for you. And the sad thing that I see across this land, people that ought to know better are just as naive and clouded in the cabbasis as Saul was. They bought the bill of goods. They think they've got a sword. All they have is a coulter and a mattock and a hoe that was made by the devil's crowd anyhow. In 1611, God forged a sword. If you can't see the hand of God, you've got your head in the sand. Only, listen to me, only the English-speaking people have been evangelizing this world for nearly 400 years. Only the English-speaking people. Now, if you were God, you were going to send forth the English-speaking people to evangelize the world, wouldn't you say, hey, I've got to give them my word in their language? Well, that's what God did. At the close of the Dark Ages, when he was ready to start the great missionary movement that has lasted clear down to this moment and will to the trumpet sounds, he said, I'm going to give him a sword. So God forged the sword in 1611. And he said, put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil, and take the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. I've got that sword in my hand. This is it. This is it. There is no other. This is it. Now the spoilers have come along, and they're out to replace it with their garden tools. Because the devil doesn't fear garden tools, especially when he made them in the first place. So they've given us the inferior mattocks and coulters and forks of the Revised Standard Version, and the Anchor Bible, and the so-called Bible, and the Douay Bible, and the Jerusalem Bible, and the Amplified Bible, and the Moffat Bible, and the Weymouth Bible, and the Goodspeed Bible, and the whole